Hello everyone. This is going to be actually the second video on how to use the CNTTS apparatus in Logos Bible software. The first one I did a live video. It did not turn out too well. Facebook didn't exactly do what I was hoping it would do, or I wasn't exactly sure how to quite use it since that was my first live video. But hopefully this video will be a little bit better and it'll be a little bit cleaner and you'll be able to understand a little bit more what I'm talking about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain what the CNTTS is. We're going to go through how the CNTTS is divided up, and then we're going to go over some variants, and I'm going to kind of show you and look at different passages and show you how to read the CNTTS for finding textual variants in the Greek New Testament. First of all, what does the CNTTS stand for? CNTTS stands for the Center for New Testament Textual Studies, and it is based out of New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. And what they did was they compiled a massive electronic database of every single textual variant in the New Testament. And if I'm not mistaken, they said that if this were a print edition, in other words, if this was actually a printed book of this, it would be over 17,000 pages. And so it is just a huge, massive database. But it is an extremely valuable resource, especially if you're studying textual criticism. If you're a seminary student and you're entering this field, I would highly recommend that you get this apparatus. Now, let me just say a couple of things. First of all, the apparatus, it's not going to really be good to you unless you have a working knowledge of Greek. And, well, I mean, you may, if you have somewhat of a knowledge of Greek, you may be able to use it, but really you're going to be better off if you have somewhat of a working knowledge. And also, too, it's very expensive. So if you're going to buy it, I would recommend, if you buy it, that you're actually entering the field of New Testament Textual Studies. Now, I bought this probably a year or more ago. I was a little zealous, I'm afraid I have to say, when I bought it, but I'll show it to you here on the website. Here it is right here. Center for New Testament Textual Studies, New Testament Critical Apparatus. You can see it's $100 for this one book. But I'm going to tell you, looking back at it now, I'm really not sorry that I bought it. I think it was a good investment. No, I'm not a student of textual criticism. It's more of a hobby for me. The area just kind of fascinates me. I like to look at the different variants, and I like to be able to kind of see for myself what the readings were in different manuscripts. I have a working knowledge of Greek. I'm not going to claim by any means that I'm an expert. I don't claim to be. I don't claim to be fluent completely 100% in the language. I'm afraid Bible software is probably making me lazy in that. Admittedly, it's just easier sometimes to click on a word, right-click on it, and get all the parsing information and all the translation that you need. However, I do have a working knowledge of Greek, enough to be able to work through a text with the aid of some good New Testament readers and some lexicons. So anyway, just a couple of words of advice. Again, if you're going to invest in something like this, I would suggest that you be a seminary student that's going into textual criticism, or that you have to write some type of a heavy exegetical papers that deal with textual criticism, or if you have a working knowledge of Greek and you just want to kind of hone your own skills and learn how to use an apparatus. Now, certainly there are a couple of options for those who don't really know Greek that well, but they know enough to know a little bit about variations, and I'll show it to you here. I didn't open it up previously, but let me see if I can find, there we go, Apparatus for Greek New Testament. This one is much easier to read. It just gives you basically what it's doing. Instead of taking all the manuscripts, it's taking the eclectic text readings and showing you where they vary against the base reading. And basically an eclectic text is simply readings that are compiled together and into one collection. And what they've done was they've taken all the different manuscripts and compared them and taken the best reading and compiled it into an eclectic text, which would be something like the NA27, or what now it's the NA28, or the Textus Receptus or the Westcott Horde or something like that. And this SBL apparatus, it's actually very handy. It's where I started when I first started learning about textual criticism. And again, I don't consider to be an expert in the field at all. I'm just simply interested in it. This is where I started, and it does have a good section at the beginning of here showing you how to use it, and showing you what the symbols mean, and then it gets into the actual books and shows you the variants here. So it's actually very read. Like this would be the base text here, showing you where it's supported at, and then showing you what the other eclectic text would have in place of this, or adding to it, or missing, or whatever. So it's actually a lot easier to read than this. So if you're not zealous enough to spend $100 on this, but you still want to kind of start dabbling in the field of textual criticism, I would say start with something like this, or another one would be Metzger. Metzger's commentary. He kind of gives the alternate readings and tells you why the base text that they use, why they included it or omitted it or whatever. And so those are two good options for those looking to kind of explore the area of New Testament textual criticism. And at the end of this, I'll give you some good resources that you can use for starting to learn it. But I want to kind of jump into this right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to break the video up here into a couple different parts. It's going to be one long video, but I'm just going to do it in sections here. So hopefully it'll be a little bit easier to understand. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to explain the layout of the apparatus here. And then as I'm explaining it, I'm going to jump over here to the reference guide and kind of point you to how each thing works here. And so we're going to be referencing that. And then we're actually going to look at some variation units and kind of learn how to read each one. So let's go ahead and get started here. The first thing you'll notice is that the apparatus is broken up into 6 different columns. And I'm going to count here because it has all 6 here, but typically when we go to start, we're going to start up here. So you have this first column here, you have the second one, the third, and you notice that the third is going to be different lines. So horizontal will be your columns, vertical will be your lines. And you're going to notice that throughout the apparatus and the different passages we're going to look at, you might have multiple lines under one column, and we'll talk about each of those as we go along. So you have your third column, you have your fourth column, you have your fifth column, and your sixth column. Now, very briefly, I'm going to explain what the columns are, and then we're going to go back over each column and look at it into a little bit more detail, and then we'll jump into the verses. So your first column here is going to tell you the verse number and the variation unit. And you can see here, I'm in John 1:14. And so it has 1:14 right here. And this matches actually my Bible. And what I've done was if you're a Logos user, you can link your panels together so that they scroll together. So you see link set A here and link set A there. So they're both tied together. So no matter where I go in my Bible, it's going to jump to that passage. And so you'll see that later on when we look at different scripture passages that are going to be representative of the variants that we're going to be talking about. So your first column, the first part of it is going to be the scripture reference. Now, then after the scripture reference, you're going to see a dash. And then after the dash, you're going to see a number and then a decimal. Now, your first number, and this is where I'm going to kind of start back up here, your first number is usually going to be a 1, and it's going to be a decimal, and then it's going to be a 0. And what that is indicating is that you're on John chapter 1, verse 14, and you're starting a brand new unit for a textual variant. And that's represented right here. If you go over here to my left here and follow my mouse, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see. And you see that anytime you come to something like this, it's going to be a brand new verse. So the 0 represents the verse, while an odd number behind this number represents an actual variation unit. So you have 1-0, which would represent a new verse, and then here 1.0 would be a new variation unit. Well, we don't have any end of there, but we do have one here. So 3.0 would represent a new variation unit here. You see here 3.0 new variation units. Now, one thing you'll notice, and we don't see any sub-variation units yet, I think we're going to be looking at a passage that has sub-variation units, so I'll show you when we get there. But one thing you'll notice is that all of the brand new variation units, 1, 3, 5, all of the new sections that start brand new variation units are always going to start with an odd number. And it's easier for tracking when you're coming to a new variation unit. Not a new verse, but a new textual variant within that particular verse. And then if there's any subunits underneath, they will start with even numbers. So you see this sub variation unit, it's 2, 4, and if you had a sub variation under that, it would be 6, 8, and so on. And so that's that. They've made it easy to track, just to track different new verses, new units, and new sub units of variations. Makes it extremely easy. I don't know how in the world I got to Matthew 26. Let me jump back over to John 1:14 real quick. That's where, there we go. Sorry about that. I don't know what I did. I must have clicked the back arrow somehow. But it's pretty easy to keep track of that with the numbering system that they have. So I was really pleased to see how easy it was to track it. So that's your first column. Okay, that's going to be your first column here. So that's all this. So anytime you see the 1:14, you know that's the verse number. The 0 is going to be a new verse, and then we're going to come to the second column. Your second column is going to list the type of variant that it is. Okay, and we have 5 different types. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 different types of variants that are going to be listed in the second column. Of course, it's easy. It says second column, first line, and of course we know there can be multiple lines. So, but this would be your first line and your first line here. So first line, this up here belongs to actually 13 because you can see we're just switched, and now we're at 1:14. So this is telling us what type of variant this second column is. There's 5 types of variants. The first type of variant is going to be marked with an L, and that stands for lacuna. A lacuna is simply a missing portion of the text in the manuscript. So for some reason or another, the manuscript that's where the variant is at somehow it was damaged. Could have been aged. It could have been the fact that it was just worn, and so you had different letters or different words or something like that that are missing from the text from that particular manuscript. And so it's marked with an L to show that it's a lacuna. The second type is going to be S. It's marked significant. Now, significant means that a word, not a word could be missing. It could be a lacuna. It could be a significant where the word is totally different from the base text, and we're going to look at the base text line in a minute. But for some reason or another, the translators have thought that the textual variant was significant enough to mark it as significant. Now, this doesn't mean that it changes the meaning of the text altogether, but sometimes it can affect the meaning, or it can affect the interpretation. And I'm going to try and find a variant. I know where there's a variant that has that, but I can't remember the exact passage. But we're going to try and look at that if I can. Then your next one, variation type, is marked with a Z. And this Z basically means that there is a textual variant, but it only has a single manuscript support. And that can either be Greek or Latin. So in other words, out of that variant, there's only one manuscript that we know of in existence that has that particular reading. And it's going to be a Greek or a Latin one. So it can be either or. The next type of variant is called an insignificant variant. This will be marked with an I. And the I tells us that it's insignificant. In other words, it doesn't really affect the meaning at all. Basically, the variant agrees with the base text, but due to spelling changes or maybe some type of an orthographic change, word transposition or whatever, for some reason it doesn't really affect the text at all, or the meaning or the interpretation, so it's marked with an I. Then your last type is going to be bracketed, and bracketed basically is portions of the text that were missing, and so they were missing in brackets, or they weren't originally thought of to be a part of the text, such as one of the most famous ones is the ending of Mark 16. We'll look at that hopefully, and also the woman caught in adultery in John chapter 7 is often bracketed, and so that's usually for missing text or for text that wasn't considered to originally be part of the original. And so that's part of your second column here. Now, you also have major variations in your second column. Okay, and you have 4 different types of those, and hopefully we're gonna see some of them. You have A. It's going to be marked with an A. That means something's been added to the text. M is going to be something missing, an omission from the text. R is going to be replacement, and basically that means the variant that's under consideration there is that one word has been replaced entirely with a totally different word. So that's all what our replacement means. And then the ones marked with a T are going to be called transposition. That means you have words that are the same in the base text, but the order of the words have been reversed in that particular textual variant. And so that's all going to be all of this column here. And if you scroll down, you'll see all these letters here and what they are here. And so again, we're going to go over them. We're going to start at the beginning and work our way down through a complete text. And so hopefully you'll understand a little bit better. Right now I'm just explaining each of the columns. Now we come to the third column, and they're going to be marked with numbers. The third column is going to be from 0 to 99. Those are all the codes. And 0 over here we see is the base text. Now here it says the base text is the UBS 3rd edition. However, if you come up to the CNTTS apparatus here and hover your mouse over it, you can click it. It tells you that the base text is actually the UBS 4th edition. So this is a typo over here, or this is a typo. I would imagine this is here, because UBS 4th is actually the base text that's being used. Actually, I believe there's a UBS 5th edition out now. I don't know if this is going to be updated to reflect that. But I do know that the base text is a UBS 4th, and if you were to compare any of the textual variants here, you would see that the readings do match the 4th. But there's usually very little difference between the 3rd edition and the 4th edition, sometimes minor changes. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out for those of you who have invested in it. That's a little typo there. Actually, I've already reported that, so hopefully they will fix that. So if you run into the 0, that just tells you the base text. A 1 is going to be a reading, if it's in this column. It's going to be a reading that represents the base text with only minor differences. And it gives you an example here: orthography, nomina sacra, etc. And we'll explain what those mean. There's some textual variants we're going to look at that have those, particularly those 2 variants in there. And we'll take a little bit closer look at those. So that, again, that's going to be this column here, the 3rd one. Anything that's marked with the code for 2 to 19, that's going to be a significant change from the base text. So you have your base text, which is the UBS 4th, and you see a number 2 through 19 anywhere in this column. That's going to be a significant change, and that change is reflected with at least 2 supporting witnesses. So that means that the base text, the UBS 4th, will have 1 reading, and anything that's marked with a 2 through 19 will have a totally different reading, and then it will list the manuscripts, at least 2 or more, that reflect that change. And so we're going to look at that in a little bit more detail too. Then you got the numbers 50 through 69. That again is a significant change, but this time it only has 1 supporting Greek or Latin reading. Okay, and again, that's going to mark, or that's going to be signaled by a Z in this 2nd column here. So they'll end up matching up, and we'll see that again later on. So anything with a number 50 to 69. Then you have the numbers 80 through 89, and these will be readings in the subunits that have already been identified in the main units. And remember, going back up here, we have a variation unit and a subvariation unit. So you won't see a 80 through 99 unless you have a subunit over here that goes with the main unit, and then the variant has already been introduced in the main unit somewhere, and that's the only time you're ever going to see 80 through 89. Then 90 through 93, that is what is called I'm going to see if I can pronounce this here. I'm probably going to slaughter it. Again, I'm not an expert in textual criticism. That is called a homotolution. I don't even know if I pronounced that right. I do know what it is. That's in a main unit, and 90 to 93 will mark that. Now, homeotoluton, I think that's how you pronounce it, is basically as a scribe copied a manuscript. Now, manuscripts in the ancient time were often set in columns and lines. So as a scribe was copying a manuscript, he might go down to the next line and start writing, but his eyes would go up to the preceding line and maybe copy the ending of a word that he thought belonged on that line, or maybe a totally different word altogether, or a vowel got mixed up because the endings were kind of alike, or accent marks, or whatever. But that's what that is somehow the scribe's eyes, as they were copying, low light, or the eyes just got older, somehow they copied the same word or ending of a word or whatever to the next line. And that's going to be marked by codes 90 to 93. Oftentimes, too, and here I don't know if I know one right offhand, but it will have the number 90 to 93, and it will be marked with an H, the letter H, showing that it is this type of variation. Then anything that's marked with the 94 through 96 will be large omissions crossing multiple main units. So that means you would have omissions crossing these main units here. Again, I don't know any right off the bat. Mark 16 might be one. We'll take a look at it, but I'm not sure. But if it's marked with that, that means the variation or I can't even speak. The missing units will span across multiple ones, 2 or more. So in other words, if you had a missing unit, the variation would be from 1.0 to 3.0 to 5.0. So it would span all of those there. And that's what 94 through 96. 97, anything that's marked with that is an indeterminable reading, something that really couldn't be determined even from the context. 98 will be partial lacuna. And it says it's here listed at the beginning of the verse. So anything with a 98, I don't see a 98 in here anywhere. I think there's another one that I've run across, but I'm not 100% sure. And then 99 is a full lacuna. You're going to see 99 most of the time. Full lacuna, again, a lacuna is something that's missing from the text because the text was damaged for one reason or another. And as the translators were marking these variants, they just kind of had to decide from the context what belonged, what letters there were. Oftentimes they could actually get them from other manuscripts. But most of the time the context told them pretty much certainty what needed to be in there as far as missing letters or missing words or whatever. So those are all your variation code numbers, which will be in this third column. And then in the fourth column, you have what's called a minor variation. And I think you have, 6 of these? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, 7 of them. Fourth column here, this is your fourth column. We don't see any codes here because you actually have the actual text here, but we will see some of them. But let's go over them very quickly. If it's marked, if you have anything in the fourth column here that's marked with an E, it means there's an error. The reading seems to be a Scrabble error that resulted in a nonsense reading. So in other words, there was a reading that just didn't make sense. Even when reading in a sentence, it just didn't make sense, and so it's marked with an E. H, again, that's that homotelutin, and I told you that oftentimes you'll see it marked with an H. And then, if anything that's marked with an N is a movable nu. Now, exactly what is a movable nu? The letter nu in Greek would often be put on a word at the end of a word when the beginning of the next word started with a vowel. And that would be kind of like our a and an. Oftentimes, when we're using those indefinite articles, we'll put an N on the end of the A if the next word starts with a vowel, such as an egg. A chair. You notice how there was no N on the end of that phrase there because the chair doesn't start with a vowel. Well, in Greek, it was kind of the same way. So oftentimes, if one word was a vowel and the next word to it was started with a vowel, they would have a nu on it. And if you have a manuscript where you had a nu on one manuscript and then on another family of manuscripts there was no nu in that same text, then that's what was called a movable nu, and so it was marked as a textual variant. And then you're going to see a minor variation called orthography, and that's just due to spelling or some kind of a transposition of words or whatever. The name John, I believe, if I remember correctly, is actually spelled a couple of different ways in Greek. And so if you had John in one set of manuscripts spelled with one nu and John in another set of manuscripts spelled with two nus, then it would be a orthographic variant. Then anything that's marked with a P is going to be a proper name of something. The reading involves the spelling of a proper name. That would be your example of John right there. Then X, anything that's marked with an X is going to be a nominus sacra. And nomina sacra is basically when a scribe copied the divine name, whether it was God or Father or Son or Jesus or Spirit. He would take the first and the last letter of that word and put them together and draw a line over top of it. And that's what would be called a nomina sacra. And then anything that's got the pound mark there, or hashtag for you Twitter junkies, it's just an abbreviated number, a shortened number, has been used. So those are basically going to be all of your minor variations that are going to be in this fourth column, and we'll see some of them. I'm gonna do a couple different texts so that you can kind of see all of these variants, or at least most of them. Let's see. I think that's going to be it for this one. The layout here of the database gives you a little bit better explanation of what it is, but I think we've pretty much gone over that. So what I want to do now is I want to kind of start here and go through each column and explain exactly how this works. And let me go ahead and go over here to John 1:14 in the text, and I'm going to turn on my interlinear so you can see. And so now I'm going to start. So remember the very first column we run into. And let me see if I can zoom in a little bit better. Hopefully you can see it. Okay. So the very first column we run into is John 1:14. Go over here, and we see John 1:14 here. So that's just the first column. This -0 tells us that we're at the beginning of a new verse. Okay, a completely new verse. Remember, that's what we were shown here in our CNTTS. So if we go back up here, we see a new verse, 0.0. Of course, this is 1:1. It's just giving an example. Excuse me. So 1:14-0, new verse. Now, this next column is showing us what type of variant we're going to be dealing with. And if you hover your mouse over it, it tells you a lacuna. And lacuna, just this variation unit appears at the beginning of each verse. It shows all manuscripts that are partially extant or not extant for this verse or passage. And extant just means they're in existence. Okay? And we don't have anything in the fourth column, so we're going to go straight over to the fourth or fifth column, so we don't have anything in that. So we're going to go straight over to the sixth column. I think it was 6 columns. 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe it was 5 columns. Okay. Anyway, the sixth column, this tells you all of the manuscripts that contain... Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I left out a column. Third column. Excuse me. So we have a lacuna type. This third column tells us that the base text that they're comparing all of these manuscripts against are the United Bible Society's 4th edition critical text of the Greek New Testament. And then this last column over here is showing us all of the manuscripts that support the base text reading. So all of these manuscripts here. So if I were to open up P75, and this is another great thing that I love about it, the hyperlinks. It tells you exactly what the manuscript is, where it's contained, and what's contained on it. So this tells us that P75, 3rd century, it's a fragmentary papyrus, and papyrus is the oldest type of New Testament manuscripts that we possess, and it's got Luke and John on it. And then it tells us that it's in the Bodmer Library, and then it gives us the Elan category as a Roman numeral 1. And it tells us that's an early Alexandrian text. And the numbers here, they've, Kurt and Barbara Elan have just categorized most of the text, the papyrus and things like that. And they've given them numbers, Roman numerals 1 through 5. And they deal more or less with the quality of the text and the text types, such as Alexandrian, Western, Byzantine, eclectic, things like that. So that's all that is. You can learn more about that. I'll give you some resources again at the end that'll get you up to speed on some of those. So this right here is basically an overview of all the variants we're going to run into in John 1:14. And so if we come down here, we're going to see where our first variation comes in, and it's 99. And remember, it's listed under significant variation units, and there are omitted portions of the text, and so it could be either or. There are instances where Latin witnesses are indeterminable for the Greek manuscript, and it's showing you the reading here: Kai ha logos. This is "and the Word flesh became." And then this second guy here, and by the way, these little Roman numerals, they weren't in this. We didn't go over them here, but these Roman numerals, if you hover over them, it tells you it denotes multiple occurrences of the same word in the same verse. So this Chi that's marked with a 1, and you notice this Chi here is marked with a 2 in parentheses, and basically here's 3. And basically it's telling you that this variant, and within this variant, this Chi is used multiple times. So any word you see, again, doxon, glory, it's going to be marked with a 1. And so apparently we have doxon again in parentheses. If you see it with the number 2, you know there's multiple occurrences of this word in this variant. And this telling us that this lacuna here is found in P66. And so if I were to open up P66, I might see it if I have P66. So we could go to my library, and don't know, yes, actually I do. So P66, John 1:14, and here it is, Kai ha logos, in this bracket here. These brackets, remember the B brackets are for missing portions of the text, and that's where the lacuna comes in. So the words ha logos, as it's indicated here, is in brackets because the portion of the text was damaged for one reason or another, and that's what this lacuna, that's why it's a lacuna, it's missing portion. In this manuscript here, these words were missing, and so they replaced them in brackets. They were pretty sure of the reading, and they placed them in brackets, and so that's what that variant is. And then we have another variant, same thing, a lacuna, and again you have this Chi that occurs multiple times in this variant, and this is telling us that it's found in a 10th century manuscript. That's a private collection of Charles Ryrie, and y'all guys probably know who Charles Ryrie is. He did his own systematic theology, and so it's classified as a Roman numeral 5 in the Alland category. But notice it's only a single manuscript that supports this. And then you can continue on down each of these lines and go over each one, and that's basically what that is. It's showing you the variation, the reading, Kai ha logos, hos monogenes para, and that's in manuscript 1247, which is the number, and it's a 15th century manuscript of the Gospel of Acts and the General and Pauline epistles, and it's telling you it's located at St. Catherine's Monastery, classified again as a 5, and I believe 5 is the lowest quality of text, and so even though it's a lower quality, they still mark it and show you where it is and what the variation is, and that's part of all that scholarship. So anything with a Roman numeral 1, 2, and 3 usually are going to be pretty good manuscripts, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Roman numeral 4 and 5 are going to be less quality, but still have to be considered when you're doing translations and things like that, etc. And so you can go down all of these lines here, and you can basically see, just follow these lacunas. And then here at the bottom here, you just have basically a recap of where all the lacunas are at here, and it tells you all these manuscripts right here. And so you just follow those lines from 114-0, and then when we come down to 114, again, if you remember this 1.0, represents a new variation. So now we're coming to a new variation. That's what this 1.0 tells us. It's telling us now that this is an insignificant variation, because remember, in the second column, it's telling us what type of variant it is. Okay? And so the base text reads sarx, which is flesh. So if I were to go over to here, the word became flesh. I can click on this and move it over here for y'all so y'all can see it. Excuse me. There's flesh, sarx. That's what the base text has. And again, our base text is going to be the UBS 4th edition. And it's going to tell us that the base text is supported by all of these manuscripts right here. So every one of these manuscripts, if I had access to all of these manuscripts, I have access to a lot of them, but if I had access to all of them, they would all read this word sarx here. Now, we're going to see some of these codes. And if you remember, as we come down, so this is just giving us an overview of what this variation is going to be. Now we're going to get into the actual variant of what it is. And then 3.0, again, is telling us what this insignificant variant is. And here's where we have multiple lines. One is telling us that it's insignificant. And E is telling us that it's an error. So somehow this textual variation here, a scribe copied it wrong, and as the translators are looking over the text or reading this, and it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Okay, and so basically it's going to tell you that this is the reading. And so if you were to open P66, you would look at this and you would see this. So let's try to still have it there. And here it is. Here's our reading right here, and it's supported by all of these manuscripts. So 1, it's insignificant, and 2, it's telling us that sarx is actually, well, the base text is, again, it's and sarx is actually the error, and it's in this manuscript right here in 19, which tells us that it is an 8th century, and it's Codex Regius, I guess that's how you pronounce it. And it's telling us that where it's at in the French National Library and along Category 2. And so that's basically how you read those columns. And you would just keep going on down all of verse 14 and look at every single variant. And again, remember, here's one with the O orthography, where something was changed, and it's telling you that the base text here has this word here. Let me see if you can zoom in so you can see it a little bit better. So the base text, which is UBS 4, has Eskinison, and the orthography text in 579 here, which is a 13th century one, has the word agenitou. And so if you had access to this manuscript here, you could compare it against the base text or whatever base text you were using and see the difference. Now what I want to do is I want to go to a different passage and see if I can come up with some of these different variants here. And so let me just scroll down to John 1:18. I'm going to show you this nomina sacra and what a nomina sacra is. And I'm going to scroll up here to this first variation unit, and you see here, there's your X. And remember, the X is going to be, I'm scrolling here, the X is going to be the nomina sacra. And so if you look, anything that's marked with an X, it's going to be a nomina sacra. So it's just a shortened form of the divine name. And so here, our base text is showing us that variation unit, showing us that the variation is insignificant. The base text, UBS 4th, reads Theon. And so if I were to open my UBS 4th edition, And just to show you. Okay. So you have John 1:18 here. Here's Theon. That's what it reads. Let me zoom in. Let me turn off these visual filters. Sorry about that. There we go. Turn them all off. Let me zoom in a little bit. You can see here's the base text. There's Theon. There's Theon. Now, in our variant, it's insignificant. That's what the 1 tells us. Remember, 1 through 19, I believe it was an insignificant. The type of variant is a nomina sacra. The nomina sacra has the theta and the nu with a line over top of it, and it's supported by all of these manuscripts here. So again, if I were to open up P66 to this verse, I don't know how that got there, but if I were to open up P66, we should see here's Theon right here. Let me zoom in a little bit better so you can see. Here's Theon, and you can see that it matches this variant. So now I want to quickly move on to another passage. Some of this got missing portions, and one of the most famous ones is the ending of Mark 16, and I'm going to go to verse, actually I'm going to go to verse 9, I believe is where it starts. I'm in the wrong one. There we go. And you can see the brackets here. This is the ESV, and it tells you from verse 9, right here, from verse 9 to 20, most manuscripts don't include it. And even in the ESV, if you hover over this and click it, there we go. It tells you, it gives you a whole big long explanation of what manuscripts include it and which don't. But you can see brackets here and then brackets at the end of verse 20. And 16:9 here is telling us that's a lacuna, and the base text for that is going to be supported by all these manuscripts here. And then here's where you're actually starting your variant. And notice that it's marked with a significant, which it should be. And then it's going to tell us that there's going to be a replacement as well as an addition. And that's where all these multiple lines, you see all these codes here now that we were looking at. Let's go back and take a look at some of them. So remember, the 99 is the full lacuna. 2, it's a significant change, and it has at least 2 supporting witnesses. And so the addition here of this portion of Mark 9 is supported by this 10th century manuscript, and both 10th century manuscripts right here. Then you come down to the next variant here. You just follow each one. So you have something that's a replacement, and it's marked with the 3. It has at least 2 supporting witnesses, because remember, 2 to 19. And so this reading here, again, zoom in a little bit closer. This reading here, Anastas ha Jesus, is supported by 69. And the variant here that's in these more than one witnesses here is a nomina sacra. So it's showing you that. Again, a nomina sacra. Let's see. Let's go. Yeah, okay. We got a 50 here. Now remember what the 50 code is. Anything from 50 to 69 is another significant change, but there's only going to be one supporting witness, one supporting manuscript that has this reading, and it's either going to be Greek or Latin. So if you look at 50, we see Kai Anastas, and that's only supported by this 5th century codex. And this asterisk here tells us that this was a reading of the original handwritten manuscript. So basically what's that saying is that this reading was done by the scribe that originally copied this manuscript. That's what that asterisk is saying. Then again, 51 indicates one supporting witness. Anomina sacra is the variant, and that's supported only by this 13th century manuscript. And you can just go right on down. Let me go to one more text here. I'm going to go to John 7:53, I think it is. Yes. Again, that's almost like Mark 16. You're going to see a bunch of different codes. This is the woman caught in adultery. And again, we have in our ESV, the earliest manuscripts do not include verses 753 through 811. So the brackets begin here at 53. And end at verse 11, scrolling up here. And there's the end of your brackets. So if I go back up to 753, we'll be able to take a look at these codes here. Here's in the parentheses, it's telling us it's a lacuna type of variation. The base text, 752 to 53, is supported by all these witnesses here. And the lacuna comes in these manuscripts here. The lacuna, again, is the missing portion. So a missing portion is in these manuscripts here. And then you come down to the second column where these types of variants are listed. You have significant, you have replacement, replacement, replacement. Then in your third column, the significant variation is going to be from the UBS fourth, which is here. And you got here that's supported by these witnesses. And then again, 3, a significant that has at least 2 supporting witnesses. And you can see here there's several. 4, remember 2 to 19, I think it is. Then you come to 99, and then you come to your new variation. So basically, that's the CNTTS. Very easy to remember. Matter of fact, let me go to one more passage. That's actually where I originally started because I was studying a passage, but didn't get there. This would be a little bit easier to look at. Ephesians 5:26 is what I was studying. I'm not going to go over them. I'm just going to recap the columns. Remember, your first column, 5:26, is the verse. -0 is the beginning of a new verse. And 1 odd numbers, 1, 3, 5, etc., are the beginning of new variation units. Any even numbers? I don't see any even numbers down here. I don't even know if I came across any yet with even numbers. But anyway, anything that you would see an even number is going to be a sub-variation of the same textual variant. So it's going to be the same verse, the same textual variant, but there's going to be a sub-variant. In other words, there's another variant that goes along with that original textual variant if you see anything with an even number after the decimal. So remember, odd numbers are the beginning of new textual units. Anything after the decimal that's an even number is a sub-variant of the textual unit. Then you got your codes here. Again, one thing I love about the critical apparatus is if you forget them, you just simply hover them, and it tells you what it is, what type of text it is. I know R is replacement, M is an omission, Z is a variant that only has 1 supporting witness. So singular, that's what Z means, singular. Then I is insignificant, the codes. 1 is minor differences, 50 is significant changes with only 1 supporting witnesses. 2 to 19 is significant changes with more than 2 witnesses, and so forth. And then the list of your manuscripts. So hopefully this has been a much more educational video on how the CNTTS works. Ask me any questions, drop me a question in the comments. I'll be glad to answer them if I can. But again, remember that I'm not an expert at it. I'm still kind of dabbling in it. But before I go, I know this has been a long video, and I appreciate you staying the whole time watching. Let me give you some resources here to look at. First thing you have is called The Handbook for New Testament Exegesis, and it's by Craig Bloomberg. And it does walk you through different types of textual variants. It walks you through different types of manuscripts. Textual commentary, Metzger, this is one that I mentioned at the beginning. He gives the reading and the variant and then explains why they used what they did. And then this is another one here, Critical Handbook of Greek New Testament. And this, just different sections to it. You'd have to look at each section, but this goes over all the manuscripts and how we got the manuscripts and, what affected it and things like that. So it's a really, really good, useful resource to have. And then the last one, my favorite one, is going to be this one, David Allen Black, and it's called New Testament Textual Criticism. I own a e-edition of this book. And when it says a concise guide, it means a concise guide. Very, very useful, very helpful, very understandable. The jargon is not way out there. He doesn't use a bunch of language that you can't understand. When you come across new definitions, he explains them very understandable way. And so this is just a great book. I would suggest that if you're going to dive into textual criticism, that you start with this book here. And then again, if you're going to want to learn how to read Apparatus, I would start with the SBL or start with something simple that's very easy to read, and that would be something like this here. So I'm actually on Ephesians 5:27, and it's giving you all the variants of 5:27 from the eclectic text. So thanks for watching. I hope this has been educational. Again, if you have any questions, just drop me a comment and I'll try to answer them.